Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today, Singapore FinTech Festival. So I'm John Broxis, and I'm going to be talking on behalf of Open Banking Exchange and explaining about who we are, case studies, success stories, and in fact be telling you about our upcoming launch into the Asian market. So what we're going to be going through is who exactly and what exactly is Open Banking Exchange. I'm going to be giving you an idea of the different case studies, the different open banking and open finance examples that we have around the world, focus on the challenges of open banking, and then explaining how we can help you, learning from the experience that we've gained from rolling out open banking and open finance programs in other countries. So Open Banking Exchange is a brand under the company OBE SAS. OBE is a not-for-profit global movement for industry stakeholders which supplies open banking, open finance, and open data consultancy services. OBE helps regulators, it helps self-regulated organizations, SROs, and it helps national communities implement effective and interoperable open solutions based on a jurisdiction-neutral technology framework. OBE is part of the Consensus Group. To talk a bit about me, I'm John Broxis. I'm Managing Director at Open Banking Exchange. I've been working in the payments and data industry since 1997. During that time, I helped build and ran Step 2, which is Europe's largest clearing system. I was a contributor to the ISO 20022 standards and created the European SEPA credit transfer and SEPA direct debit schemes that are used universally throughout Europe. And I founded Open Banking Europe, and before that, my bank. Within PSD2, which is Europe's legislation for open banking, I held a number of roles, but I was part of the Berlin Group standards that is used in Europe, and I created Open Banking Europe and Open Banking Exchange, which is what we're talking about today. Let's talk about the vision and purpose of OBE. So it's clear that open banking, open finance, open data is becoming a global phenomenon. In fact, it is a global phenomenon, but it is not an easy rollout, and there are risks. Fragmentation across financial institutions, across countries and across regions is a clear problem. And the general confusion over terminology and aims slows down the pace of growth. We look to help and solve those problems, those risks, through community involvement, bringing market players together to shape regulatory requirements and help turn them into operational reality through collaboration, and through a number of frameworks and transparent information sharing that we run at a national or regional level. Here are some of the members and contributors who've been part of the open banking journey that we've been running over the last 5 years. As you can see, we have we're multi-stakeholder. We have banks, we have fintechs, we have trust service providers, and we have various other partners. This will change region to region, but certainly some global brands there. So that's a bit of who we are. Let's just step back and have a look a bit about the global open finance initiatives around the world. I'm just going to give 4 or 5 examples. There are many, many more, but we can look across the world at some of the different implementations that are currently ongoing. So let's start with Europe, which is where we started our own activities. The European Union was one of the first to mandate open banking under its PSD2, the Second Payment Service Directive. And their implementation really focused on payments and payment accounts. As an implementation, there's strong legislation, but there's no central scheme, there's no central standards, there's no central infrastructure, and it's left to the market to provide these things. Policing is left to the 31 national competent authorities across Europe, so it's the different central banks, the different regulators in each country, which has led to fragmentation within the European Union. What's interesting is their use of eIDAS certificates for the security infrastructure, something that's quite unique within Europe. And so we can consider that Europe's in a phase one of its involvement. It's really looking at open payments, where users can share data from payment accounts and can initiate payments. And as that rolls out, we now start looking at open finance, where we have ongoing discussions at the regulatory and the market level to understand what the next steps will be. A very different model, a very different contrast is Australia. Australia didn't start with payments. Australia started right at the end with data, with their CDR, the Consumer Data Right Act, and then sector by sector, the Australian community has been moving those different communities into this open data framework. So phase one was allowing the sharing of data from personal bank accounts. Phase two was around loans and joint accounts and closed accounts. And phase three moves into broader open finance lines. And in fact, there's a longer roadmap that takes us beyond finance itself and into other open sectors such as energy or healthcare, open healthcare. So Australia, a very different end of the spectrum. Brazil has its implementations. Been going they started very late, but have been going very fast and fairly successful in kicking off an initiative in the last 18 months. Hong Kong, also a very strong initiative and a roadmap that moves across different phases, different rollouts. And here we see Mexico, where there are, again, a number of different phases. They talk about open data, they talk about aggregated data, they talk about transactional data. The point of these slides is not to go into them one by one, but to show that different countries are active and they all have staged approaches, but different frameworks and different models of operating. The UK is the final example I give, where the FCA, which is the Financial Competent Authority, is pushing for open finance and incentivizing firms and TPPs to work together. In fact, the UK probably has the most centralized and best documented system, although there are a number of problems with their implementation, but certainly with 4 million active customers using open banking services, we can see that certainly it's moving beyond the sphere of technicians and experts and into the real world. Of course, we can all have interesting debates about different country approaches, who's doing best, who's moving fastest. But again, there's just some snapshot data on the fact that different countries are rolling out their programs. I'll come to Asia at the end of this presentation, but I now want to move on away from a country focus onto the different use cases that open banking allows. We've done research across fintechs and TPPs, and the data in front of you on the screen actually comes from Europe, where we've gone through every fintech set of offerings and categorized them into 6 categories and 23 different services. Now, what's interesting about open banking services, open banking enabled services, is that while at the API level, we could talk about account information or payment initiation, or perhaps account opening as services that will exist between a fintech and the bank, the services that are offered between the fintech and the consumer, the fintech and the customer, are very, very broad. Here we see the different categories. If we look at the category manage, we can see account aggregation, confirmation of funds, personal finance management, automated savings, top-ups. I could go through these one by one, but I won't. I think this is a whole topic in itself, but I'll just dive into a couple of slightly more real examples. So if we look at the one specific European TPP called TrueLayer, and we look at the basic account aggregation functionality, then we can see the user journey where a user will go on a TrueLayer app or screen, and they will add different bank accounts to a portal. So here you see the user selecting an account with Royal Bank of Scotland, and after they've reached Royal Bank of Scotland, they're asked to authenticate themselves, and they can see accounts. And then finally, on that TrueLayer app, the user can see their Royal Bank of Scotland accounts, but they can also see their NatWest accounts and their transactions from across the different bank accounts they hold. So this is the very basic, almost like the first service that is offered to consumers. We call this account aggregation, and it allows a fintech, in this case TrueLayer, to pull data from 3 different banks to allow the customer to have a single view of their banks and their transactions in one portal. So there's account aggregation. But as I said, there are many categories and many types. And here we see a few more snapshots. On the top right, we've got a company that's offering credit scoring using rental payments to improve credit scores. So this is very exciting for topics like financial inclusion, where people typically don't have a great credit history, but the intelligent use of financial data can be served up to create credit scores in more interesting and more dynamic ways. Popped up on the left there, we see a brand called Okie, which is helping small businesses keep track of invoice payments to make sure that invoices are properly paid and that they're not being fined or losing penalties because of failure to pay. Another example, a little bit small to read perhaps, but is around, again, fintechs helping small businesses doing cash flow projections using historic bank data. Again, interesting to see that the open banking, open finance part of this is one ingredient. So clearly that the company has gone and taken the financial data from the bank account using the APIs, but they don't just serve it up. They in fact package that with analytics, projections, reportings, alerts for a specific purpose. In this case, cash flow projections. Here we see another example, a company called Bitic, which is using transactional data to look for fraud patterns and fraud reportings. Top left, we've got another credit scoring example with Contomatic. Interesting one, bottom left, a company Tink, which is using bank data to give instant verification of account ownership. So if you're signing up for a service and you want to say, well, I've got this bank account, and the service provider says, well, do you really own the bank account? How do I know this is yours? Tink are offering a service that will allow them to check, or you to confirm in real time, that this is really your bank account. Okay, we've got payments, we've got automatic top-ups, we've got In fact, yeah, okay, that's the last one. We could spend an hour just discussing different use cases, but clearly it's a very dynamic market, which is allowing many different services to happen, but only if it works in the back end. So having shown some of the benefits, what are the challenges? We already hinted at them earlier. The challenges are it's really complicated and a very confusing world if you're trying to implement open banking, open finance at a country level. It's not so difficult for a single bank or a single financial institution to put up a developer portal, to publish an API, and it will work. But to get a whole community, a whole ecosystem, putting up APIs that follow standards, that follow similar rules, that allow a community of fintechs or other banks or customers to use that across different banks in a seamless, interoperable way, as required by some of the use cases that I just showed you, that is a big challenge. We've been following this challenge over the 5 years, and we have a number of different reasons why banks, financial institutions, communities are making different choices. And so, and these different choices can happen certainly within a country at the national level, certainly within a regional level between countries, and of course at a global level where different regions are using different standards. In Europe, we have even in Europe we have multiple standards, although the biggest is arguably Berlin Group. In the US, FDX are a standard that has the most traction where standards are used. The UK has a different standard again. South America, we're seeing different standards emerging. So there's not 1,000 standards, but there are certainly a handful, and it's worth understanding how they work, why they exist, why they're different, and how we can help them converge. So what do we do to help solve these problems? Well, basically, we've got a methodology that's got 3 different components. The first component is a framework that talks about common infrastructure requirements that may or may not be needed in each country. The second is a handbook which shows all the different choices and processes that will be needed or may be needed in each country. And finally, and most importantly, we have the community. And it's the community in the end that decides how the framework and how the handbook will be applied. Each country is different. Countries have different requirements, different priorities, different backgrounds. And so there is not a one-size-fits-all answer right now. Perhaps in 5 years, 10 years, we can dream that everybody will be using exactly the same standard. But today, standards and programs are being rolled out separately. So it's very important that we go through with the community to understand what their needs are, what their priorities are, based on the number of banks in the country, the number of fintechs in the country, perhaps the unbanked versus banked population, the level of technology that exists, the regulatory regime, the ambition of the regulators and their focus. Many different topics we could discuss around whether open banking, open finance is pushed from a regulatory perspective, or whether it's market driven, whether it's about social inclusion and financial inclusion, whether it's about competition, whether it's about services. These will affect how the framework and the handbook are used. Just to dig into those 3 things in slightly more detail, the framework, the open banking framework, draws out a picture of components that will be needed, starting from the left, moving to the right, and showing the correct sequence of delivering components from stakeholder management, program management facilities, from rules, rule books, standards, from certification processes, from trust platforms, from transparency data, from help and support and reporting tools. These show the different components that will need to be understood and put in place for a successful open banking scheme. Community, as I say, is a very important piece. Open Banking Exchange runs community programs in different countries, and we will be now rolling out within Asia and different countries within Asia Pac. So we talk about 5 services that we're providing. Part of it is education, part of it is networking and discussion, part of that is Q&A, help desk, question handling. We provide a lot of data through trackers and reports, because there's too much going on for any one organization to properly understand and have a handle on. And finally, we have the handbook in our publication section, along with articles and features on specific aspects of open banking, open finance. What's very important to us is that the community is made up of all the different stakeholders. This means the financial institutions and the fintechs sitting around the table, along with the service provider community, in many cases, but not always, security providers, so trust service providers, security providers, and finally regulators. We spend a lot of time talking to the regulators and the quasi-regulatory space, understanding their motivations, and in fact we offer services to them as well in order to help them reach their regulatory objectives and in order to help open banking or open finance grow in each country. And finally, the handbook is a document or set of documents which really explains all the different choices, the definitions, the components that have to be understood, and serves as a basis for creating a blueprint for rolling out an open banking program across an entire country or ecosystem. So these are the 3 pillars of the Open Banking Exchange program. I'm just going to give you 5 key things that we've found over 5 years of rolling out open banking and open finance across different communities. The first important point is that you must really think about central infrastructure. There's a misunderstanding or an idea that if every bank or every financial institution just publishes an API or even an API standard, then that will be enough to solve the problems and create a useful working open banking, open finance environment. It's not enough. There's more that's needed. Tracking, reporting, statistics, monitoring, and especially onboarding and understanding of the different roles that exist across the ecosystem. Secondly, it's very important to be clear about why a community is doing open banking. Think about incentives and business models. Is this compliance driven, or are all parties incentivized and want open banking or open finance to work? Thirdly, this goes back to infrastructure really, but think about testing platforms, sandboxes, reference sites. How will we encourage a competitive fintech environment? Fourth, think about education. Education, certainly for the customers, but also to the wider market. One of the challenges of open banking and open finance is it brings a lot of very diverse people together in a project area. We've got technologists, we've got payments experts, we've got data experts, we've got lawyers, we've got regulators. They all see the world very differently and they don't understand each other's problems. So being able to give a complete view of what open banking, open finance is really helps your projects to succeed. Finally, think about what happens when things go wrong and reporting reporting the good things when they go right. It's very easy just to put up the standard and sort of hope that everything is working. But one of the problems we have in Europe is that all the banks have APIs, all the banks have some level of standardization, but there's absolutely no centralized market data on whether anyone's using these APIs, whether that usage is growing, what that usage looks like. You need to measure in order to manage. So once we create a membership community, there are many discussion topics. I've gone through at a very high level some points, but most of those points that I've mentioned in themselves can be a good hour's worth of discussion topic or thinking in itself. Here's some words. We can talk about fragmentation. We can talk about TPPs. We can talk about regulatory edge cases, particularly around agents and outsourcing. We can talk about use cases, transaction counting. We can talk about standardization and what we need to standardize and how to standardize it and all the different standards that are out there. There's many topics. And these are the topics that we'll be bringing to the table through our Open Banking Exchange Asia program as we go forward. So we've got a great track record working with communities and with regulators around the world. In Europe, we basically created the business process that's used by the banks there. We created and standardized the reference number that's used for open banking transactions between fintechs and banks. We led and participated in the creation of a standard called ETC 119495, which is the standard for digital certificates that are used for identification in open banking, open finance in Europe. And we did a lot of work on standardizing regulatory data from many different data sources to help the banks and financial institutions who are providing APIs understand, yes or no, is this fintech allowed access or not? So we did a lot of work in Europe. We're now running in Asia. We're now running in South America, Central Europe, and as we go forward, we will be opening up in Asia and starting chapters in different countries specifically. What does that mean? Opening up Open Banking Exchange Asia. We will be establishing a brand presence with a marketing and outreach program. We'll have a series of educational webinars that will be starting next month. We'll be offering training programs, and then we'll start a country-by-country rollout in 2022. In fact, we're already engaged with a number of regulators across the region and doing specific work within at least one community for the central bank there, where we're helping them define their open banking exchange, their open banking, open finance framework. So this is ongoing work that we're doing. I'm very excited that we've got an opportunity to talk to you about this today at Singapore FinTech Festival, and I'd love to get into a more engaged space where we can talk to each other, where we can hear your views, hear what you need, and understand how we can all work together to make open banking, open finance work within different countries and across the region in Asia. Many thanks. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. We're here to help, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future. Many thanks.